Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you all for your contributions and interest in creating healthy school environments for our students around the world. I am Anthony Houtz. I'm an architect and associate principal at Cushing, Terrell, and I'm anxious to dig into this topic today with the panel. And we find ourselves right now in an interesting intersection. We have a wide diversity of needs in our schools, so much need, and we know that funds are becoming available to address some of those needs, which begins to raise a lot of questions. What are we able to do with those funds? What should we do with those funds? And how do we get the most out of every dollar available? Ideally, we want to be sure that we aren't just reacting, but that we're leveraging available funds to maximize their impacts for the long-term stability of our schools. Confronting the pandemic over the past year has brought to light the pressing need to invest in more holistic design solutions for learning environments, to provide long-term benefits for the people who use these spaces. This goes beyond identifying specific solutions to address COVID-19 and the spread of airborne disease to looking at the synergy between systems and spaces to design for overall health, wellness, and student performance. I am today joined by my colleagues with a diverse array of professional training and experience in and around the education market. Corey Johnson is an education planner. Alex Russell is a mechanical engineer. Kaare Sola, senior interior designer, and Dayton Rush, landscape architect. This is a complex topic, and we'd like to get a variety of different perspectives from different backgrounds to fully begin to explore the potential in our schools. We will be touching on a wide range of ideas as we go through this. So if you have any questions for anyone on the panel or have any specific questions you'd like to ask us, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom, and we will try and touch on as many as we can at the end of the session. So ultimately, we want to start to unravel this idea of what we can do with this funding and what are our opportunities in our schools. But I'd like to begin with some personal thoughts from our panel on what our schools actually do. And I'd like to start with Kaare.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. When we're thinking of schools, they can do a lot of great things, but ultimately, I think that they're really there to provide a place for community, and that often that can become the heart of the community.
Yeah, I like that answer, Kari. We work, as you know, with a lot of rural towns where the school is literally the community center. So, equipping students to be lifelong learners and actively contributing to their communities is the mission.
Yeah, they're also a place to learn, not just by looking at a book or looking at a screen, but we also learn from each other and our community members.
I'm going to take a very personal approach to this as an engineer. So when I think of schools and what they do, it's a collection of spaces throughout my life that have really shaped and defined who I've become and the path I'm on today.
So we all come from different perspectives and we have different specific ideas of what our school priorities are. And last year, as we're all aware, our vision of what our schools actually do was really tested. COVID-19 really put a burden on our school systems across the country, across all of our demographics for faculty, students, administration, and our facilities. Some districts were remote for long periods, others tried to do half weeks or hybrid systems, and still others attempted to go full time and follow guidelines from the CDC. So last year redefined our schools as more than buildings, and it proved how important they are for our society as a whole. Recent studies are showing wide distribution curves of how much learning was lost among our students during COVID. And all of this has heightened awareness of how important it is to have resiliency built into our education facilities. So this idea of resiliency is a great buzzword, but when we really get down to it, what does it really mean?
Tony, I'm gonna jump in right there. Resiliency to me is flexibility and adaptability. When we have good design, it gives us those two things in equal measure. We can be flexible, we can be adaptable to whatever situation we're in. If the pandemic has taught me anything, it's that good design is always relevant.
Yeah, in the world of educational planning, that flexibility, adaptability, we've actually been talking about that for decades, but this last year has really put that to the test. Not surprising, adaptability is like a key skill we're trying to instill in our students, educators, us designers, our community workforce, right? And so the skill really helps us to adapt to new situations, environments, that technologies that keep advancing, programs, and Yes, pandemics.
And in a way, Corey, our response to the pandemic, hybrid learning has inherently built in resilience to our system. Having to onboard quickly, forced infusion of technology into our schools, that's developed new options and skill sets for our educators.
Yeah, it sure has. And what a challenge this past year has been. Thank goodness we at least had some technology backbone in place during this point in time. But I just want to pause, and I think all parents would join in saying that educators out there and tuning in, thank you. Especially after this year, we have a new appreciation for all that you've done and all that you do. And again, in educational planning, we've talked a lot about student-centered education, individualized learning plans, distance learning, and learning outside of that classroom. And this year we had that trial by fire, right? And it wasn't perfect. Our hope is that this current situation sparks new virtual technologies and learning programs, and we know that it's much harder on our younger students and a little bit easier to implement with older students, college students who had already been experienced with online or hybrid learning, right? And we've also learned the importance of in-person interactions that have been, blatantly realized. And now it's being really more intentional with that and capitalizing on the best between both worlds, both the live and the virtual interactions for collaboration and the ability to have learning happening everywhere at any time. And this isn't only for our students in our schools, but it's actually for the entire business world, right? And the world that they will be entering. We've all had to pivot hard this last year and figure out how to navigate both. Matter of fact, still doing it, right?
So it's important for us to have resiliency of our teams in our schools, resiliency and flexibility in our schedules, our technology, our mechanical systems. What does resiliency in a healthy school mean for our spatial environments, both internal to the school as well as the exterior around the schools?
So for our sites, I think that resiliency really is something we learn from nature, learn from looking at natural processes that teaches us to really be resourceful and adaptable. So we always want to think about our sites as being as resourceful as possible to changing environments, changing climates, but we also want to be adaptable to multiple users and multiple levels of accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely, Dayton. And to add on a bit, I think what's really exciting when considering a resilient interior of a building is the room to transform and to get really creative with our design solutions. Of course, flexible furniture and lighting are always great considerations and should absolutely be considered. But we also get to start thinking of equitable learning in the physical and virtual world. And as well as when you start to combine those two worlds. So in public, in a physical environment, we tend to have more control, of furniture layouts or changing them, heating, cooling, lights, etc. But when we're virtual, we're often kind of at the mercy of our screens and the location of those screens, nearby windows, background noises that we might not have control over. This year, we took a dive into some studies of equitable learning with one of our major clients, and this was really just to start to understand how the perception of people in a virtual setting can start to affect performance, focus, and perception of from others. Ultimately, we need to be considering each type of environment and the intersection of them. And when we can come together early as a project team, these are the type of challenges that we can start to provide solutions for.
And there's opportunity for utilizing our interior spaces for more than one use too, Kari, right? I mean, financially, spatially responsible kind of
Yes.
approaches to those.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many opportunities of interior spaces to be, just like you said, multifunctioning while still being financially and spatially responsible, aware of the program and able to flex.
So we've learned quite a lot. Just listening to Kaare talk there just reinforces that fact that we've learned so much during this past year. And as a society, we've really changed and altered our pre-pandemic status quo. And I'd like to explore that with the panel a little bit here. Now that we look back on what we've learned and how we've changed as a society around our school facilities, what do we think looking to the future? If we're starting to talk about how we're going to spend some dollars to improve some of our facilities strategically, we should look to the future and kind of see where things are going. So, Corey, can you touch a little bit on that, how this might affect the future of our schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So we assisted many schools last summer, assessing dozens of school facilities, and our objective was how do we get students and teachers back into their classroom safely. And so the big question is, what did we learn from these assessments? And uh, everything from narrow corridors to the lack of large lobbies, commons directly at the entry points, created pinch points, and it made it extremely hard to, safely distance. And where we had larger spaces, such as gyms and cafeterias, where we had the separation space, we found that a lot of those spaces had poor ventilation. And interestingly enough, 21st century learning has been a buzzword now for, well, I guess for 21 years. And when we put that to the test, we actually found that it was functioning quite well. In other words, the adaptability of small learning communities and their arrangements, being able to have multiple uses of classrooms flexing and opening up to one another or to larger collaboration spaces, to have small group breakout places, to have localized restrooms and support spaces and teacher support spaces huddled around grade groupings was a benefit. And in those facilities that had updated, and a lot of them have, to good security and safety planning principles, were really effective too. Like, again, from primary entry monitoring to wider observable corridors, and then that compartmentalization of schools and grade groupings, being able to keep the cross-pollination that we needed to during this pandemic year from occurring. And then to get into the future, how does this affect the future? It's interesting because we've had some recent community planning meetings, and we've been asked by public members, now, do we need less area than we did before? And that's a reasonable question. Hybrid learning doesn't mean that we've now really freed up in-person classroom space, and actually the opposite might be true. In many of our older facilities, we've found that we actually need more space or better arranged utilization of space to meet the diversity of learners and educators. And of course, specialized spaces for distance learning and dual hybrid learning teaching stations are also required. So it's going to be interesting to see how those programs flush out in the years to come.
Thanks, Corey. And Dayton, you've done a little bit of exploration into some different ideas around some of these topics and looking to the future with the Park Academy.
We did. So the Park Academy was just a study of our team that we created in the last year. We wanted to think about a school as maximizing resourcefulness and adaptability, and we looked for inspiration from a neighborhood park. Those are things that are already, they stand the test of time. They bring people together, and they're usually super resourceful in their materials and location, kind of being adaptive to really any neighborhood. So this school was really designed with that in mind. We wanted to think about not just where we learn, but really how we learn. And we wanted to think about how people come together and all the spaces in between classrooms that people can learn in. We also found that there are just certain things within the school program that really lend themselves well to having an outdoor connection to them, especially things like large gathering spaces or laboratory spaces, or even some of the other louder functions like arts and music. Those kinds of things really work well to stand alone. So no, we don't propose eliminating all corridors from schools in the future, but we really wanted to think outside of the box a little bit and think, is there areas that these smaller pods could break off from a larger footprint? And what those allow is they allow a lot more flexibility in our classrooms. We're also able to solve some of the challenges that we have with those spaces I just mentioned, especially when you think about labs or something like that needs a lot of natural ventilation. By going smaller, we can handle those things just on a more case-by-case basis. So this was just a fun way to think differently and think about what the future of learning could look like in a very resourceful, adaptive environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We all want our schools to be as healthy as they can be, and we want them to be developed to be resilient and flexible. So armed with what we know now, looking back at the past year and before then, and looking toward the future for some different things that we know are going to show up, what are the best investments we can make in our schools right now? What should we all be focusing on and identifying as targets to get the best return as a healthy environment on our investments as a community?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Tony. While there are many places to prioritize investments, overarching, I'd say my response is really indoor air quality. And I'm sure Alex will have plenty to add to this topic as well, in terms of systems. But I'd actually like to discuss a bit about prioritizing healthy materials, your furniture selections, and honestly, just kind of your communication of that. By having a materials expert or somebody focused in that area during the process, we can really help to start guide healthy material selections that won't off gas. And essentially, off gassing is just the release of harmful chemicals that can then be breathed in by humans. Another consideration for this topic is just the overall construction process, actually. And perhaps, you have a retrofit, or, you've already installed your ducts, but there's still construction going on. If you're able to properly communicate and make a plan and have a conversation with your general contractor so that you can close those duct vents to avoid debris or dust, that may have a negative impact on the quality of air circulating later on when it's occupied, then, that's a pretty quick fix. That's just a little bit of communication there. So again, just having a plan, considering your materials that are going into the space, and I could assume Alex is going to pick up here with some systems as well.
Well, what jumped out to me, I heard the word investment. So when Tony says investment, I'm instantly thinking money and budgets and constraints. So how can I leverage my expertise to maximize those first cost dollars to really give us the ultimate benefit that we're looking for, something that's not applicable just to today or to a circumstance, but long term. And really our goal is to create a conducive learning environment for our students so they can thrive and they can learn optimally, and that it also allows our teachers success so that they can educate the way that they need to educate. And that's a holistic solution. That's a holistic design. That's daylighting, that's glare reduction, that's thermal comfort. And yes, healthy indoor air quality does play a role in that.
So, Alex, we're working with existing buildings and all these different factors that influence indoor air quality. How do you begin to define or evaluate indoor air quality in the systems that provide it, either in new facilities or existing facilities that we can look at? How can we get a baseline to start to drive intelligence into our solutions?
Right. Healthy indoor air quality, we've already said it a half dozen times. It's easy to say, it's so much harder to quantify. We know when we have it, and maybe more importantly, we know when we're in a space that doesn't have healthy indoor air quality. There's so many variables that go into assessing and defining what constitutes healthy indoor air quality. When we dove into this as a firm, we wanted to create something that was repeatable and remove some of the subjectivity that comes with the assessment process. Naturally, there's some subjectivity that comes in. So we distilled that down into to the things that we felt really mattered, and we looked at it from a very analytical approach so that we could make something objective and measurable. And what that allowed us to do is to really be able to compare space to space, and then also take aggregates and compare building to building. And we could baseline across a district or across multiple districts, so we know just how well the space is doing now, or the building's doing, or the district's doing, but also how can we improve that. And indoor air quality is so much more than filtration and ventilation, although that is a big part of it. I have to throw that caveat in as being the engineer on the call. But it's everything that goes into that. Where does the fresh air come from? Is that fresh air truly fresh? Is it helping us or is it hurting us? Pollutant source control within spaces. So with COVID, we have an understandably good reason to try to keep safe, sanitary, disinfected surfaces, but we're bringing a lot of chemicals into the building now. Are we capturing those pollutants as they're off-gassing and fuming and we're cleaning appropriately, or are we making the matters worse through different means while we're trying to do right? So it's everything. It's adjacency to spaces that produce a lot of particulate matter and things that we don't want to breathe in. Are we thinking about that and controlling the pressure and how that's being handled mechanically and through architectural means, as well as material selection? So it's all of these things. It's holistically, that's how we achieve these really resilient, great designs.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at those report cards up there, Alex, and I can't help but wonder if that one on the top left is yours.
It's probably a little bit too high of a GPA for me, but yes, this is a good snapshot, Tony. Thanks for pointing this out. So these are taken right off some of our assessment tools. We on the top here, we have two buildings that we've compared side by side, both as is and a 2.8. Well, as I alluded to, is not a bad GPA, but we have room for improvement. So the scorecard on the right up there shows if we did our recommended IEQ measures, we can improve that. And then just like academia report cards, there's a lot that goes into those singular grades. So that classroom 209 we referenced, we drop down below that. That's all the things that we're looking at more inside that space to come up with that singular grade. And our goal is to really make something that can be communicated clearly and concisely back to the user group that needs it the most, so that you can make definitive decisions and maximize your first cost dollars.
One option, Alex, just to kind of further follow up on this topic, is there's a lot of COVID-specific technologies that are in the market, have been in the market, but are really generating a lot of press right now, and they're easy to throw in on top of existing systems. I think a valid question would be, what are your thoughts on investing in those types of systems right now?
COVID has taught us an entirely new vocabulary, and engineers love long, complicated sounding things. Ultraviolet germicidal irradiation, needlepoint bipolar ionization. These are just two of the technologies, and there's more that are out there. My responsibility as an engineer is to safeguard public health. That trumps everything. There's also a need for me to make sure that the dollars we're spending are worthwhile and beneficial, not just, again, for a snapshot in time, but is this a long-term viable fix? Or are we making things harder by adding layers of complexity and maintenance and issues? We need to be very cognizant of that. So for me, going back to the health and safety of the public, which is my ultimate priority, I rely on our scientific community to help inform us on a lot of those technologies. And right now there's a lot of literature out there. It's getting peer reviewed. There's a lot of peer review process to come up with concise and consensus within these things. Right now, we don't feel that that's there. There's a lot of conflicting arguments over whether or not these things are providing the benefit that we want. Are they difficult to implement? Are they potentially making things worse? So I distill it back down to the most basic things. Good engineering design, doing the things we talked about, making sure we're providing the appropriate amounts of ventilation, we're filtering things right, we're handling pollutant source control. All of these things and more go into making resilient decisions. They're good design both before the pandemic, and they really shine during the pandemic, and they're going to continue to be applicable moving forward. And that's where we're at with that.
So what you're telling me, Alex, as I listen to that, is that fresh air is always going to be important, right? Now and into the future.
I'd much rather be outside than inside. How's that?
Fair answer. Fair answer. Dayton, that said, I'd appreciate your insight here too, and pivot over to you. Outdoor learning spaces, actually using the outdoors where the fresh air is, can be a valuable asset that many of our schools already have access to, but we're not always fully leveraging. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so last year, when we were all kind of forced to move outside, we learned a lot of things that work really well and things that don't work really well. We've always known that things like activities, like sports and athletics, really work well outdoors. But a lot of those things that Alex had on his scorecard that are challenging and really costly to build on the interior space and to have fresh air in, so large assembly gathering areas, laboratory spaces, cafeterias, those kinds of things all really benefit from having a companion space or being completely outdoors. Here's a school here that we've got a photo of that has this this kind of sunken plaza area with built-in seating around it. It's just a really functional space that could serve those larger events, could be an extension of classroom spaces already. And those are things that if we design them in correctly now, we can make them a lot more functional than some of the things we had to throw together over the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add on a little bit more to that, when we look at bringing the outside in, there's also a lot of benefits for individual wellness that can be reaped. And by providing spaces with greenery and considering different biophilic design elements, we're able to design spaces that can actually reduce people's stress levels, help improve their focus and attention, as well as promote healing and actually be really therapeutic.
And Kaare, I really appreciate you mentioning mental health too, and of course with the pandemic, the awareness is really out there. We're feeling that in our own environments that we've had to change this past year. Um, Connections to the outdoors, whether it's in your virtual office, in your house, or it's at the school. Um, we saw a lot of that this last year. From throwing up outdoor tents to give a shelter, canopies, making use of patios. Anytime the activities can be taken outdoors, it provides that fresh air, that sunlight, that good vitamin D, a lot of space to move around, and so benefits of having your library, go to a reading garden, a learning community, being able to take activities outdoors, and in this case a STEAM lab that opens up to an outside patio. It really gives the opportunity for a diverse a diversity of learning modalities, experiments that can take place both indoors and outdoors, and small group interactions. It provides the opportunity to really think about our learning environments in a magnitude of arrangements and activities.
So the way we're approaching the design and diversity of our learning environments is changing. Equity is at the forefront of many of our discussions, and there are a lot of ways to go with this as we discuss our schools. Contemporary research is consistently showing that students learn in multiple different and unique ways, and our teachers are becoming better at differentiating and accommodating that aspect of human learning tendencies. But our facilities aren't really set up to always efficiently assist that process. So maybe I'll send this question over to Kaare. How can our schools begin to vary their environments, and is that a good idea?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's a fantastic and crucial idea that we are varying our environments. Kind of like we've mentioned a little bit, we want to definitely keep flexibility and adaptability at the forefront of our designs, as well as a constant that we continue to come back to throughout our process. Ultimately, we're really focused on bringing people together, but we have to also recognize that not one size fits all, and that goes for both students and staff, right? So we want to start to review each program space, whether it's classrooms, gyms, exterior areas, um, uh, and even other points throughout our circulation that start to allow for some of those more happenstance connections, for instance, within the corridors or stairwells and beyond.
You mentioned bringing people together, Kaare. I think that's a simple statement that means a lot in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, doesn't that sound nice after this last year to all come together once again? And and learn together and with each other in environments. I heard something that really stuck with me. It's 15% of us only get 15 minutes per day outdoors. And just by increasing our access to the outdoors and outdoor spaces, it's something that we can really come together in a safe environment.
Mm-hmm. So right now, there's been a lot of talk about the dollars that are potentially available to different districts. We have the $81 billion in American Rescue Plan Aid funds, as well as some specific COVID-related funds in the stimulus package. And there's another potential $100 billion in Biden's infrastructure proposal. But the way that filters down through the states is tricky, I would say, at best. But this is a welcome and a potentially welcome and unique opportunity for our schools to have some access to funding to help enhance their schools, their facilities, and build capacity and resiliency. And I guess I got two questions for you, Corey. The first one came through the Q&A, and that is, all the funds are coming through the states, but there's potential that the legislatures would interfere with that, right, and adjust their budgets, assuming that the schools are going to receive some of that funding. So can you touch on that first, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we can fund some of the things that we've already discussed.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. The purpose of the funds from the federal government are to cover all of the costs and to make our schools healthier. And so there's a dozen things that they specifically mention, and one of them is really drilling into the facility and saying whatever it takes to make our facilities healthier, and it gives emphasis on indoor air quality. Now, with that being said, and how that's passed from federal to states, some states are using their Title I formulas to appropriate that down to the school districts, and that very important that state by state, wherever you're at, and agency by agency that's distributing these funds, you're meeting the full extent of what they're appropriating as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the second part of that, all the things that we've been talking about, from HVAC and indoor air quality to potentially looking at furniture systems or flexible interior environments, exterior environments, technology, a lot of those things can be funded through those funds as well. Is that correct?
Yes. And again, there's really good evidence-based design out there to support everything that we've been talking about, to having proven research and studies that can show that it brings health to your occupants, to your students, to your faculty and staff. It's really interesting as we talk about this, because again, this goes way beyond our current instance here, and as it should. Indoor air quality, what Alex was referring to, I mean, we've had that cold and flu season year after year after year. We've seen how it's taken a toll on absenteeism, how it takes a toll on our health. For those of you that are in states that receive fire seasons, you can see what that does. Allergens, which are diverse amongst the populations. All of these add up to good long-term solutions that can help for decades to come. And as we know, we have, I think I just saw the statistics that the national average age of our college and school facilities are 50 years old. And what that means is, we have a lot of infrastructure and systems that are at or past their useful life. And these funds really have the chance of augmenting some good needed infrastructure updates. Are the classrooms over capacity? Are your hallways too narrow? Are the mechanical systems outdated? Are the restrooms in a good arrangement? Are there cleaning stations or sinks in all of your classrooms? I think these are all fair game. And again, with the appropriated funds, with, if you're doing a bond, if you're going after other grants, if you're using deferred maintenance dollars, these can really be augmented by these funds and leverage kind of a wider range of needs that your school or college may be facing.
So let's, for the sake of discussion, since we're here talking about this possibility, for the sake of discussion, let's say that we have these available funds to spend in some quantity. And here in the Zoom panel, I'm seeing a mechanical engineer, a landscape architect, an interior designer, and an education planner. And you know what happens when we put 4 diverse disciplines together? They're all looking at each other, trying to figure out how we prioritize this. So I guess I would ask that if we all agree that a balanced approach is ideal, how do we, when it comes to implementing any sort of strategy, begin to prioritize what to start with?
Yeah, let me jump on that one. I mentioned our assessment tool. So we created our assessment tool to help do just that, to help define where the space of the building was at currently and how could we prioritize improvements that would fix that. But what I really love about working in an integrated firm is that we have a holistic design approach and a goal, and our common goal is all to achieve together at a healthy space. And with that, we really do influence each other's design decisions and have input to that. As an engineer, my tool belt is consistent maybe of only a hammer. So I'm out there looking for nails, but maybe that isn't the mechanical only solution. It's part of it, but it's not the whole solution. Maybe it's an all of the above solution. And that's where we achieve our best success through a holistic design approach where we're all working together for that commonality of a healthy space.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in as well and definitely want to echo what you're saying, Alex, with the holistic team and approach for sure. And also just wanted to highlight communication again and really bringing together all of the stakeholders together early on, so that we can make sure that we are implementing a strategy that we all agree on and that we can kind of all continue to march to the same beat on, right? When we all come together, we're able to put everything on the table, we can prioritize together, and then we can make really intentional decisions together. And we are able to keep that flexibility and adaptive mindset present so that we can continue to be resilient for the future and whatever it holds. Just like we think about the building holistically, we definitely need to be thinking about the entire process holistically: vision, programming, design, construction, and occupancy afterwards as well.
Yeah, and to add to it, we've also found that really no one learns in one particular way, and we also know that every environment across our country really is very unique and different. So it makes sense that no one school should be the same. There's no one cookie cutter that will work for everyone. And what we found is that a really robust community engagement process during a master planning and during school designs is really important to really understand how the community already functions and how people learn and the environment that's unique to every community that we do work in.
Yeah, Dayton, you said master plan, and I guess to those educational leaders, facility managers out there, if you haven't addressed it recently, now's a good time to go back and update your facilities master plan. Take a good look at updating your assessments too. Make it a good comprehensive plan. If we're going to tax Alex with going and replacing a mechanical system, we really want to make sure that he's citing it correctly, for any future alterations or additions that may be in the, master plan for the future. I do truly believe that, you talk about prioritization. The best health investment that we can make in our schools and colleges starts with that air quality. and that is where the funds have had the emphasis put on it. But again, all grades, all upgrades should be done in concert with holistic facility improvements, and that's really leveraging the full power of integrated design solutions, making it sustainable for decades to come.
Thanks, Corey. I'm going to pause there for the panel and ask a few questions from the Q&A. We've got a few minutes here before we close out. So I guess the first one for Alex, I would ask, we know the airborne spread of disease is a top concern due to COVID-19, but the drive to improve air quality in our indoor spaces and resiliency isn't new. How has COVID-19 impacted basically our standard practice and the systems for keeping people safe and healthy?
How much time do we got left? What a great question. And the easiest way to distill that answer down would be that I'd hit on it earlier. Good design was relevant before COVID, and it really, really shined during COVID. So a lot of the strategies that we were implementing in design in 2018, 2019, leading into the pandemic, they shined above and beyond as we went through the pandemic and looking forward. So what did we gain from that? There are things we can do. So we're looking at ventilation strategies. Is it better to do a decoupled type ventilation where a fresh supply air is brought in independently of the heating and cooling system, and then it's removed? So any contaminants or viral loads created in that space are extricated from that space and removed outside. Or do we take a better approach where we recirculate the air and we almost over-circulate it, so we dilute that viral load down, so the efficacy isn't as great? We've hit on a few times, there is no one size fits all. The key is, are we using the best available knowledge and practice what we preach and putting that into our designs? And if we're doing that, it's applicable not just for this situation that we're in now with COVID, but to Corey's point, we're helping absentee rates drop through cold and flu seasons. We're improving learning environments. And that's our ultimate goal, is to create healthy spaces, not just in a pandemic, but looking forward through any circumstance we face.
Thanks, Alex. Question for Kaare, I think. Has the pandemic and responses to COVID-19 affected the way that we're specifying materials for interior spaces of our schools? Have we seen a lot of change there? Can we still put carpeting in certain areas in our schools? Can you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a similar response, but different than Alex's, in that, when we were first going through COVID and understanding capabilities of the virus or not, there was some kind of response to immediately say, okay, like, we're taking out all fabric and carpet and going to this very sterile room. Well, hopefully, we can all recognize that that's probably not the best solution for every learning environment, any office, take any other environment. Probably not going to be the best space for people to be in. So I would say there's still quite a bit of research in place, and a lot of the guidance that we have been following has been more procedural of the individual, washing your hands, cleaning up after yourself, using some antibacterial on surfaces. So those type of considerations are definitely being taken into our research and design decisions, but it's definitely more of a case-by-case basis. It's still not that one size fits all, as we've been saying. And I think ultimately we want to make sure that we are not exchanging the value of one property for another. We don't want to be putting on a germicidal coating if we don't actually need it. Maybe we can choose a material that's inherently antimicrobial and is not going to off-gas. So hopefully that helps a little bit. But yes, I would say it's still safe to be specifying carpet at this time.
Excellent. We don't have to live in vinyl boxes. That's good, right?
We don't. No, and shouldn't.
And it looks like maybe we'll have time. I'll ask one more. We kind of talked about some of the critical items that we might be able to address on the interior side pretty easily in some of our schools, as well as the HVAC side, things that we can really look at and target. Dayton, what are some things based on COVID-19 that we've seen that impacts our outdoor space design? And is there any easily achievable things that would apply to a lot of different schools across the country and around the world we might be able to take advantage of on the landscape front?
Sure. A couple things that come to mind are, I guess the first one would be when we move into the outdoors, we don't have the advantage of being surrounded by walls anymore. So it's easier to be distracted by, the community nearby, roadway sounds, people walking by. So whatever we can do to start to filter the views of our outdoor spaces so that they become a little more functional as a learning environment. That could be done with landform. It could be done with planting trees, hedges, any kind of outdoor screens. Those kinds of things will really start to help define outdoor spaces and keep those distractions down. And then there's actually like one positive thing that I can think of that came out of this whole pandemic is that we're starting to see furniture vendors really answer the call for more robust outdoor solutions. If you've ever tried to take a folding chair outside and have it sink into the lawn, you know what I'm talking about. Or if you've ever tried to write on one of those perforated tables that you see out in parks all the time. None of those are real great for learning environments, but we're starting to see more and more options that are more durable. They're more flexible in different types of surfaces outside, and just lighter weight and easier to use. So it's not just doesn't have to all be heavy, hard concrete stuff in the future. And that's actually been something good that we're seeing more of that on the market, and it's just starting to reach price points that are a little bit better for all of us.
Thanks, Dayton. We have an opportunity in front of us and a challenge. The opportunity to me is that we've got the opportunity for funding to further protect and enhance our students' well-being. And we have the challenge to embrace our options creatively, responding with solutions that capture more than just maintenance. The challenge to drive integrated intelligence into our schools, make them healthier learning spaces. And as someone who's always loved school and loved learning, I look forward to seeing what our schools can accomplish. I'm looking forward to this next period of time and really seeing what the technology and as people come together, how they're going to work in and around and within their schools. If there are other questions, comments, or follow-up, all of our contact information is up there on the screen. Feel free to reach out. I want to thank everyone for joining and spending time with us. And I really want to thank the panel for all that you do for our school and learning environments and for who you are as people and in your communities. So thank you, panel, very much for taking the time to hang out. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for joining in.
Yeah, thanks, y'all.